To our evening session, we are joined by the incredible Mark Wales, who's a former career Special Forces officer with the Australian military. He's going to dive into what life in the SAS was like and leading in chaos, which I think we've can all say we've felt a bit of in the last year. Wherever you are joining from in the world, welcome. It is 6 o'clock in Melbourne, and it's great to have you here. Before I introduce Mark and bring him up onto the stage, just want to introduce a bit more about Mark's background, in particular, what he's going to cover today. So as I said, Mark was a career Special Forces officer in charge of 30 elite soldiers. His role was to lead combat missions deep behind enemy lines. Mark has completed more than 10 tours of duty to Afghanistan, Iraq, East Timor, Lebanon, and the Solomon Islands. Mark's successful transition from the Army led him to a high-profile business career. He studied with the Wharton School of Business and joined McKinsey Company. He was listed in Wharton's prestigious 40 Under 40 Awards for Business Excellence. He's the founder of tough luxury brand Kapture and is a published author. His memoir, Survivor, is due for release in June 2021. He's also married to the equally incredible Samantha Gash, who, if you check out her website, is a ultra long distance marathon runner, amongst many other things. And they have a 3-year-old boy called Harry. So Mark, I'm going to bring you up on the stage. And look, thank you so much for volunteering some of your time today. Your story is fascinating. I cannot wait to get my hands on your books. So do you want to fill us in on the journey pre-army, during army, post-army, and what leading in chaos?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having us, Julie. You probably see my 3-year-old. I get a feeling he's going to run out at any point because I'm not in my office. So I'll definitely pick him up and you can say hello to you. But thanks for having me. I, as Julie was saying, had spent a long time in the military and left and held a career in business. So I think one of the main things I noticed was all the work I'd done in the military kind of had these themes in it that related to teamwork and working in tough jobs and encountering obstacles. The mechanisms for working in a team I found were the same, no matter whether you're in a high-performing military team or a sports team or in business. So that's kind of what I stepped into now. I left the military and got myself involved in corporate speaking. I found there was a real appetite for hearing some of the threads around how mission teams think about mission, how they undertake teamwork, and how they look after themselves as well. And on that kind of last point, when I talked about looking after yourself and self-help, I talked a bit about the experiences I'd had coming back from repeated wartime deployments and just how much of a toll that had taken on me. And that really struck a nerve. I found out there are a lot of companies and a lot of workers that were really operating at a really high stress level and we're feeling the impact of it. So I speak a lot more about that now than I ever have, and I'm finding there's a big appetite for it. It's just common. People working hard, they're burned out, and that's the case more than ever now. What I'll do, I'll show you some slides quickly, and this is all based around my experiences overseas. You can have a look at some pictures. I'll talk you through them, and at any point, if you've got any questions, just reach out on the chat function, and we can quickly address your questions. So, okay, so this is what the standard battlefield looks like in Afghanistan. And as Julia was saying, it was pretty hard. But I think for me, the real war was not so much in Afghanistan. It was in the fashion world. After I left the Middle East, it made Afghanistan look like a cakewalk. And a lot of kind of what I experienced in business, I'll talk about, but most of it came from the military. I think that's where the really good lessons for me came from. But first, let me take it back a few years, and I just want to show you a photograph that really changed the course of my life. And it was this one. This is the Iranian embassy siege in London in 1980. So quite an old photograph. But what happened here was there was the embassy got taken over and a bunch of people were taken hostage. There were 26 hostages in this building, and the entire world was watching this on live TV because they wanted to see what was going to happen to all these innocent hostages. And on the 6th day of this siege, on live TV, the British government committed this counter-terrorist force to go and rescue all these hostages. And that's who you can see here, these kind of men and women clad in black, gas masks, submachine guns. They're getting into the building to try and rescue all these hostages. And they did that. They got in through these burning windows. They rescued everyone, and everyone was really surprised. And no one had really heard or seen this team for a long time. They were called the SAS. Last time anyone had seen him was in World War II. They were deep behind enemy lines, and they were rescuing. They were attacking enemy airfields. And here they are, streets of London, broad daylight, in 1980. So I saw these photos as a kid when I was in high school in the mid 90s, and I thought, you know what? That's what I want to do. I want to join a team like this that rescues people in their darkest hour. Only one problem for me. I was just a little fella. I grew up in a little town called Newman in Western Australia. Population's 900. Often I ask people if they're from Newman. No one puts their hand up because it's such a small town. But it was iron ore mining. Both my parents worked there. I had two brothers. We all lived in that place. I was about as far from the army as you can get. But I thought, you know what? I'll consult a mentor of mine about joining the army. And I did. He was older than me, a bit wiser. He just said, fate really calls upon us at a moment of our choosing. Not sure if you know who said that, but it was Optimus Prime, the Transformer. Used to talk to my toys a lot when I was a kid. And, you know, I kind of loved Transformers. I loved their values, how they worked together, and they had a mission and a team. And that really resonated with me as a kid. So, you know, I decided, you know, I'll listen to this guy and keep going towards the military. A slightly more human mentor for me was my granddad. He used to work in the bush in Victoria, and he was a lumberjack, right? So he used to chop trees down. And I remember him telling me some stories about just how dangerous it was to work in the field. And one day a tree fell down and knocked the chainsaw out of his hand. Like, it was such a dangerous workplace to be in. And he said, you know, I don't care what you do if you go to the military, Mark, but just make sure you keep your axe sharp at all times. And I thought he was being quite literal, you know, but I think I figured out later he was being it was a metaphor for him, like stay sharp, keep your tools sharp and your mind sharp. And it was great. I mean, I eventually got there. I was 17 years old, and my parents let me go across to train in the military. And I was able to spend 4 years, and this is the night I graduated and got my commission. This is a photo of my mother too. It was kind of a sad photo because we found out not long after this that she actually had cancer. So she had a really big battle in front of her. And at one point, I found myself training in the army. I was out in the middle of nowhere. I was on a Navy ship actually in the ocean. And I got a call from my father, and he said, "Hey, you got to come home. Mum's gotten really sick, and she's only got 2 weeks to live." And so I had to fly all the way back from this Navy ship and go all the way home to West Australia and get to my mum's bedside. And you know, I had the chance to sit with her for 2 weeks and ask her the kind of tough questions you can ask someone when they're at the end of the line. I was like, you know, Mum, tell me what you've kind of learned in this life. What do I need to know? And she said, I thought I had more time. I'm only 50 years old. I thought I had more time. And we talked a bit about, I told her, you know, I want to go to the military and do this SAS thing. And she said, you know, just get started because you have less time than you think. And as heartbroken as I was, for me, it's still probably one of the best bits of advice I've had. And that is that the clock is ticking. So if you want to do something big like chase a goal or take some action on something you've always loved but never quite had the ability to follow it, then just do it now because the clock is ticking. And so after that, you know, I went off on a peacekeeping mission to Solomon Islands. Before I left, I went to the base hairdresser and said, you know, give me the best haircut you've got. That's what they gave me. And off I went to the Solomon Islands, and I thought about selection and going for the SAS and thought, you know what, I've just got to go and do this. This is going back to the SAS. This is what they look like in World War II. So small teams, kind of deep behind enemy lines, seeing your soldiers. They didn't really follow rules. They were quite unconventional, but really high impact. They really had an impact on the enemy and what they thought, and the fear levels, I guess, of the enemy. So Australia copied this same model. We formed the SAS. That was a motto and the badge. And eventually the Australian SAS saw action in Korea and Borneo and Vietnam. And I wanted to join. I heard about this selection course to get on. I knew it went for about 3 weeks and the pass rate was about 15%. I also found out it was kind of split into 3 phases. There was this week 1, there was really intense testing, and that put you through a bunch of really high intensity marches and work, and it basically weeded out all the unprepared people. And the middle phase was called Happy Wanderer, and it was this isolated endurance phase where they make you go and walk for 120 kilometers on your own, kind of day and night, which sounds achievable over 5 days, but I was carrying about 50 kilograms in my pack and my rifle and everything. So your body really breaks down, and I was losing a kilogram of weight every day. So I was really getting broken down mentally and physically during this middle phase. And then the last phase is called Lucky Dip. And it's not lucky at all. It's actually pretty terrible. But they put you in the teams of about 4 or 5, and they make you do really impossible missions around the clock with no food, no sleep. And it's designed to replicate combat conditions. You know, this is what it's meant to be like when you're in combat, and it's quite difficult. So I went through all that. It was very rough. I lost 16 kilograms of body weight. I would not recommend that as a weight loss program, but I lost a lot of weight. And I think what was interesting to me though is the attributes they were looking for in soldiers. It wasn't physical; it was more mental. They wanted emotional intelligence, leadership qualities. Like everyone had to be able to lead a mission. Problem solving was important, and also a sense of humor. Like there was a sense of, they knew that was about resilience, about having that humor and seeing the lighter side of things. I normally go into a bit of detail about the first day I remember getting in there, but long story short, they took us into this giant aircraft hangar and stripped us completely naked. And we're all standing there with no clothes on, wondering what on earth they were going to do to us. And the lead instructor just said, this is a really hard course. More people have climbed Mount Everest than have finished this course. So if you want to leave, do so now, and no one will say anything. No one moved, of course. And he goes, all right, reach in your bag, put your uniform on. We're starting now. Years later, I asked that same instructor, I was like, why do you humiliate us at the start of the course and strip us down out of our clothes? He said, well, we're showing you, it's symbolic. We're showing you, we're taking control of you, and we're going to strip you down to your bare bones. We're going to see what your character is like. And when we're done with you, we're going to rebuild you with a new set of values. I was like, oh, that's amazing. That's really interesting. That's why they do it. And he said, no, not really. It's just a dirty joke. We do it every year. And so day 2, I remember going out onto this parade ground, and we had this big field set up of pea gravel, and there were these giant green ropes on the ground. And we had to do a push-up test, right? And there were 3 ambulances parked right behind us with their doors open. And I was wondering, what are they going to do to us? They spent the whole day giving us push-ups, not so much to see whether we could tolerate push-ups, but inevitably, within an hour or 2, we're all failing at it. None of us could get it right. And time again, they're shouting at us going, you guys are terrible. You can't do this. You're not going to pass. And what I kind of realized is this is not a physical test. This is a mental test they're putting us through. They want to see how we respond to failure again and again and again. It's going to happen really often. So for me, it was the first introduction to the mindset behind accepting failure and dealing with it and kind of moving on. What was really interesting, though, is how they prioritized their thinking, and it kind of, their hierarchy of needs, there were 3 parts to it. The mission came first, the team came second, and the individual came third. So with the mission, this is always talked about at the start of every job. It was the one kind of clear thing you could always head towards, no matter how much fog or friction there was on the battlefield. And it's a really good organizing principle for any human group, not just in combat, but also in business. And they've done research on this with mission-orientated businesses versus more profit-orientated businesses. And what they found was that these mission-orientated businesses returned 6 times more shareholder value than the other data set. So it's such a great organizing principle. With teams, the idea here is you would look after each other no matter what. You would support each other. You would cover each other in failure, and this created really high levels of psychological safety. I knew I was going to be looked after no matter what happened, and that sense of trust and bonding really produced a high-performing team. And then with self, the idea was here that you would take good physical and mental care of yourself. You would make sure you were functioning at a high level and you were capable of doing what your job when you needed to. And it's a bit of a misnomer, because even though your needs are meant to come third, if you didn't look after yourself, you would not be able to support the mission or the team. So there's always that constant tension. And finally, there was this attitude in the teams of, no matter how hard this gets, we're just going to keep going. We're just going to keep pushing ahead and see if we can make this work. And I think that perseverance, that is such an important attribute. You just got to keep in the game sometimes, and sometimes you just have to endure. And I saw that a number of times be more important than talent and skill and ability. So perseverance was a big one. But we got through. This is me and my friend, went through all the training, got our berets. 2 years later, found ourselves in Afghanistan. So 30,000 troops are flooding into the country. The war on terror, all the coalition troops trying to fight Al-Qaeda. I was in a special operations task group, so that was about 1,000 soldiers. I was a troop commander, so I was in charge of 30 of those soldiers, and my job was to help lead the mission, plan the missions, lead the missions, and be on the ground with all my guys. And our mission was to actually kill or capture the enemy commanders in Afghanistan. There was kind of no easy way of saying that. Like, it was a pretty tough, dangerous mission. We kind of had everything to win a major war. Like, we had all the equipment, all the body armor, the helmets, and the aircraft. We had all that fancy stuff. And all our enemies, by comparison, had very little. Basic weapons, no training, basic uniforms. So we thought it was going to be pretty easy. This was our first mission, actually. If you see this valley, we had to clear it of the Taliban. We knew there was about 100 Taliban in there. It was an important valley, probably about 3-4 kilometers long, a couple of 100 meters wide. And that green area is where all the agriculture happens. So all the water flows down there. That's where they grow all their crops. So pretty nice area. That's where everyone lives, down that green belt. And they're always surrounded by mountains. So, really rough terrain. You can see it's like the surface of the moon. Super hot conditions during the day, get up to like 53 degrees in the shade. So we did a lot of work at night. Amenities, toilet, it's pretty basic. 44-gallon drum, chopped in half. And it had diesel in it. And I tell you, the worst job, if you made any mistakes, you had to be responsible for taking the toilets out and burning them. And it was terrible, because your mates would come out and take photographs of you while you're trying to do it, like I did to that guy. And, I said I had a team of 30. Within that team of 30, I had 4 smaller teams. And so this is me, I'm on the right there. I'm sitting down with my team leaders, and we're trying to plan the mission. So we might take up to a week to plan a mission like this. And to do it, we just stick to a few really basic principles. We keep it really simple. Like, we talk about it in 3 phases, really. We'd say, how are we going to get there? What are we going to do at the target once we're there? And how are we going to get out? And so we kept it really straightforward. And then we, in really close detail, we talk about what we could control. So, all right, we can decide when we leave, what weapons we take, what aircraft we're going to use, what route we're going to take. We'd plan that in a lot of detail. And then there'd be all these other contingencies we just couldn't control, because the enemy gets a vote in all this. So we'd look at it and say, all right, what can the enemy do to us in this phase that really stops us from achieving our mission? And we think up all these scenarios, these bad things, like, oh, what happens if a helicopter gets shot down in phase 1? And so we'd map that out on the whiteboard. We'd talk about what would happen. Then we'd go and practice it on the ground. And we'd do that with maybe 5, 6, 7 scenarios that were really bad. And they didn't always happen, but it just gave us that agility on the ground when it did happen. And often it changed our plans. And finally, there's one other thing we do. We focus. We just choose one thing, one target, put all our firepower, all our intelligence, all our troops on just that one target. And that focus was needed because often so many things would fail and go wrong. So you needed that duplication on the target. It had a name. It's actually a principle war: limit your objectives. Simplicity was the other one, because so often we saw that complexity is the enemy of execution. You just got to keep things really simple. I really saw complex plans unravel quickly under pressure. Yeah, and this guy at the back, his name is Matthew. He'd been in the Valley the year before, and he was able to tell us all about it. You know, it was pretty intense combat he was in the year earlier. He actually won a Medal of Gallantry for it. So he was an experienced guy and important to have in the team. But, you know, we got ready to go for the mission. I'm the Chewbacca looking guy, second from the left. And, you know, you get a photo the night before you go out, and I was excited. I'd never been in combat before. I had no idea what was going to happen. So we walked out all night to get into the target area, about 8 kilometers, I think it was. And in the morning, the clearance force landed in helicopters and started sweeping through the valley. And really, everything was going pretty well. It was, you know, maybe 7 a.m. and nothing had happened. It was quiet. Like, it was actually quite eerie. There was no combat, no noise in the valley. Troops are moving quite well. I picked my team up and moved south to an ambush location. And I knew we were heading towards where the Taliban might be, but I thought they'd left. So as we're moving towards this area, I saw something kind of unusual. I saw a cornfield, and it was unusual because it was withered. It was all dead, and that shouldn't have been there because the harvest had just happened. So most of the fields were kind of plowed, and you know there was nothing really in the fields. But here's this corn stubble just sticking out in the field, and this looked really odd. When I was looking at it, I saw a man dressed in black on the far edge of the cornfield. He stood up and walked away quickly. And on the other side of the cornfield, I saw a woman walking away holding 2 kids, kind of one in each hand. And just as I saw those 2 things, I was like, we're in trouble. And I didn't realize it, but there'd been Taliban in this cornfield for the last 2 weeks, and they'd been digging bunkers and fighting positions, getting ready for us to arrive. And they had waited until we were right next to them. And the reason they'd waited until we were so close to them is because they knew at close range, we couldn't use any of our big advantages like airstrikes and artillery and attack helicopters. If you're really close to the enemy, you can't use that stuff. So these guys were smart. They waited until we were right on top of us, right on top of them, because they could see out of the corn and we couldn't see in. And at about that time, the cornfield just erupted. There was gunfire all through the corn. Everyone that had a weapon was in that area. And I ran forward and jumped into a low ditch. And I was just trying to gather my bearings, really. And a lot of people ask me what that's like to be shot at close range. And I think if I could sum it up in a word, I'd say it's pretty unpleasant. It's not fun at all, because I could see like things slowed down a bit. It's like my brain was moving really quick. So things slowed down a bit and I could see explosions, but I couldn't really hear them. So I felt like my ears were kind of shutting out noise. It was just kind of bizarre. I could see colors more clearly. It was pretty surreal. So we spent the first 10 minutes just trying to get orientated onto the enemy. And at one point there was this tall New Zealander in my team, and he jumped in the ditch next to me, and in his Kiwi accent, he's like, "Hey bro, careful, there's lots of Taliban in the corn in front of us." I was like, "Thanks, Captain Obvious. I've been here for like half an hour trying to fight." So we stood side by side and kind of fought in that area. But about 10 minutes into it, I heard this radio call. Someone said, you know, "Man down." And I thought, "Oh, that's bad. That's one of us." And I went down the river about 20 meters to see what had happened. And I saw someone lying down. They'd been wounded. And I looked at who it was. It was Matthew. It was my guy, my sergeant that had been here the year before. He'd been wounded, and we needed to get him out of there right away. So we had to call in American helicopters to try and evacuate him. The whole time we were in heavy combat. It was really, really tough. And I could see the helicopters coming in to pick him up, and they were getting shot at. Like, I could see sparks flying off them, and I could hear the metal getting hit. It was really crazy. And after we'd moved him back about 200 meters, we got him in the helicopter. We flew him straight back to base for surgery. And so over the next maybe half an hour, I got my team out of that area, and we managed to get into a secure building. And I jumped on the radio straight away to my boss. I'm like, "Hey, how's Matthew? Is he back at hospital? Like, what's happened? And my boss got on the radio and said, Matthew's dead. He died on the helicopter flying back in. That's what he looked like. And I mean, I didn't expect that. When I heard that, I was standing with my sergeant in this room. I remember, like, I took off my helmet and I took my weapon off and I put them on this little folded blanket, and I just cried for, I don't know, a minute, because I knew he had a wife back home and a 13-year-old son, and and we'd lost this guy that was just a gem, and he had been with us not 20 minutes before, and so yeah, it was such a shock, and we didn't have time to grieve. We had to put our gear back on and get back out to the walls to keep fighting, because by that point we were starting to get surrounded by enemy. And so it took us about 12 hours to get out of that dally. And by the time we got out, we were, starting to run low on ammunition. We had, radio batteries running flat, and we were running out of water. And the only reason we got out of there is because we followed our mission, we looked after each other, and we stuck together as a team. So we got out of there and went back to base. We held a wake for Matthew. I'd never, no one told me what to do when you have a fatality in your team. I was never trained for this stuff, so I didn't know what to really do. But we kept at it anyway. We had a few drinks, had a lot of drinks, and we got back into missions. And the next mission we went on, we had another incident where we were trying to get a bomb maker. He was making a lot of roadside bombs, and on the approach to the target, one of our cars hit a bomb, blew up, injured 3 more guys, and they were sent home. So we're only kind of 6 weeks into our trip, and I've already lost 4 team members. So the trajectory is not looking good. By the end of 6 months, we're not going to have anyone left. So we had to band together, figure out how to do this smarter, and then we got better and better, I guess, as we went. By the end of the trip, we actually came up against enemy formation, and we totally caught them out by surprise. And we spent the next couple of weeks just going up and down that area, strafing them and bombing them. It was hard. It was super high stress. And this is me at the end of the tour talking to my boss, and I can kind of see it on my face. I'm kind of really, really under pressure. But we finished that trip. We got ready to go home. I hadn't even been thinking about going home. Luckily, we didn't lose anyone else, but I was like, God, just get me out of here. Eventually, we got home, and I thought, what am I going to do here? I'm just going to take a couple of weeks off, and then I'll go back to work, and I'll be totally fine. I wasn't fine at all. I went back. Couldn't really sleep. I went to my apartment. I shut the door. I didn't want to come out for days at a time. I had a girlfriend that had waited for me the whole time. I didn't want to see her. Didn't want to see my family. So it was a really long, it was kind of unusual behaviors, but eventually I was like, you know what, this is a bit much. I need to get some help for this. I went and saw an army neuroscientist, and he just grabbed me and goes, look, I explained him my symptoms, and he goes, all right, I'm going to show you what's happened to you. And he sketched like a brain on a whiteboard, and he highlighted the bit in the middle. He goes, this is your amygdala. And before this, he goes, actually, you know what? I'm going to give you a diagnosis here. You've got post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. He goes, no surprise. You've been fighting for a long time. So I'm going to explain to you what's happened. And he showed me that bit in the brain. He goes, you've been overusing this amygdala. It's a really ancient kind of fight or flight mechanism here that you've been using just to try and survive. And what's happened is you've benched this part of your brain. He kind of circled the front. He goes, this is your prefrontal cortex. It's your kind of executive functioning. It's your CEO as such, and that controls logic and empathy and reasoning and all the more complex things we do as humans. He goes, you've benched that while you've been trying to survive, and it's atrophied quite a lot. So you're actually more human than you are. You're more lizard than you are human at the moment. And I licked my eyeballs and I said, no, that's not true. And he goes, well, good news is I'm going to show you how to fix it. And it's quite basic, actually. He goes, you're going to do just 3 things. You're going to exercise more, you're going to eat better, and you're going to get some rest. I said, oh, cool. Do you want me to pay for that advice? And he goes, yes, I do. But just hear me out. I'm going to explain to you what to do. He goes, with exercise, you're going to get about 120 minutes a week, vigorous activity, and that'll dampen the symptoms of your depression. With food, you're going to eat leafy greens and reduce your sugar intake, reduce your alcohol intake. That too is going to dampen your symptoms of depression. And with rest, you're going to get 7 to 9 hours a night. And I'm going to show you this bedtime routine you can do, which will help you rest and relax. You're going to have a shower, you're going to stretch, you're going to do some breathing exercises, you're going to read a book, and then you're going to get into bed, and that's going to help you kind of relax. And so I thought, oh, this is basic stuff. But I followed what he said. I implemented these into my routine and made sure I followed it. And sure enough, it started to work. I started to slowly recover from these things. And I think this had a lot to do with it. Many years later, when I went into the corporate sector, I started to realize that these 3 things are not just there for healing measures or preventative measures with mental health and wellness. They're actually the cornerstones of high performance. And I'm sure I'll ask you now, like, who notices when they get busy that these 3 things start to go out the window? Like, of course, I can see people nodding. They go out the window because it's very hard to maintain them. And before you know it, your performance drops and your health drops with it. So I really try and audit this often in my life. I just had 2 weeks with Sam. I got sick and I was like, I literally haven't done one of these things properly in 2 weeks. So I don't always walk my talk, but at least if you've got that awareness of what you need to do to maintain your health, you can always get back on track. It's worth talking about the habit of actually doing that. So most people think habits take about 16 days, 21 kind of days to form. I did some research on this, and they mapped out very simple habits all the way through to complex ones. And they found out there was a bell curve, right? So quite a spread. And what they found was the median time it takes to implement a habit is 66 days, so about 10 weeks. So it's not something that you can just do for a weekend and call it a day. You really got to work hard at these things for a number of weeks to embed them as a principle. Another thing he said to me, he goes, go and have fun, go do something different. So every year I booked a surf trip. Me and my mates went out. We're in Indonesia this year. We have a dress up day every year. I don't know why. This is Heroes and Villains Day, so I went dressed as a stormtrooper. I nearly drowned wearing that outfit, by the way. And but the good thing is I was out with my mates, and I was just enjoying it. I was doing something new. Wasn't a great surfer. Did I care? No. Did it matter? No. I was just out there enjoying it and learning a new skill. And slowly that actually healed me. Did a few other things that scared me. Started a bit of amateur boxing, and here I am about to go out in Philadelphia against a semi-professional guy. And the good news was I kept a perfect fight record after this of 4-0. 4 losses, no wins. I literally did not win one boxing match. Total loser in boxing. But the good thing was, like surfing, it was another skill that I was just learning and enjoying, and it just helped. It really helped me heal. And I think those basic habits that I followed let me go back to Afghanistan. I went back 3 more times, so another kind of 18 months. And that really kind of saved my career. But I eventually said, you know what, I've been doing this for 6 years. I really need a break. I need to do something different. And so I decided to apply to business school in the US. And that was the same. It took me about 2 years to study and try and change my brain that I just hadn't been using in that way for a long time. So the science and maths and all that. And eventually I got in. I got into the Wharton School in Philadelphia, and first day of school here. This is only a quarter of my class, by the way. It was a huge class. And it was great. I had 2 years full time, totally away from the military. And it was good because I actually wanted to do something where I could be free of judgment. I'd had this idea in the military, and I couldn't really talk about it much because it involved men's fashion, starting a business in men's fashion. And you don't talk about it in the army because people make a lot of fun of you. But I'd had this idea about incorporating these values of special forces into a clothing brand. And I wanted, I took a prototype and I built a jacket and I rolled it out at the fashion show, and it went well, and called it a nice friendly name, Kapture. And bit by bit, we started to get a bit more traction, and people started buying it, and it slowly grew. This guy came out to a photo shoot. He's like a celebrated Marine Corps general. He eventually became a Secretary of Defense, so that was a good win. At one point, Tony Abbott bought one of our jackets. I was hoping for a David Beckham or some cool fashion icon like that. Excuse me. But we got Tony, and he asked we do a swimwear range. I'm like, no, we're not doing a swimwear range. But slowly it started growing, right? Like I left business school and got a job in New York City as a consultant, and that was a good job. But my mind kept going back to that clothing brand. I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this full time. So I did it full time for 3 months, and by the end of 3 months, I was out of money. I was sleeping on my mates' couches, and only eating twice a day. But I had that strong sense of mission behind it. It was much easier to take the hits when you believe in what you're doing. And we still do it today. I get my friends to model with me because I don't want to buy, pay New York models, but I get veterans to come out and help me in the shoots, and it's a lot of fun. And then later on, I heard about this Australian Survivor TV show, and I thought, you know what, I should try and get on it because I'll be able to wear one of my jackets out. There's a bit of product placement, and what will actually happen is I'll win because I'm ex-SAS and I've got this amazing survival training. I did get on the show and ended up getting kicked out in about the first week, so that didn't go so well. But I got to wear my jacket out on the show, which was great, and also met this lovely lady on the show named Samantha Gash, and as Julia pointed out at the start, only 4'11", but we got along famously on the island. We were really close, and we worked together a lot on the challenges. And by the end of the show, by the time we'd left the show, we'd struck up a little romance, and it's never official until you put it on Instagram. So there it is there. And we went on a little trip around the US, and a couple of years later, we welcomed this little guy to the world, and that is Harry Locke Wales. And I called him Locke after my sergeant that had died in Afghanistan, Sergeant Matthew Locke, because I hope he inherits just some of the kind of wisdom and the skill that guy helped show to me. So, Sam and I think about this a lot. Like, what are we going to teach Harry as he grows up? And it's really, I think it's just a summary of those things. It's, the clock's ticking, so choose something you love and execute towards it every day. Keep your tools sharp all the time. And, finally, just remember you're going to get hurt doing this. You're going to fail a lot. Pick yourself up and keep going. And finally, I'm just going to tell him, what I was told in the military, because I think it's the key to a good life, and that is who dares wins. Excuse me. So that was kind of my story of being in the military and one combat experience there in a nutshell. I think I took probably more from that one fail, and I do count it as a fail because of who we lost. But I learned a lot from that, and I still kind of try to apply it now. So, I'd like to open it up and see if anyone has any questions about it, or Julia, if you've got anything you want to add.